Define your purpose or your mission, because everything needs to filter to that.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
What is up, all my aviation friends out there? Welcome back to another episode of Fly the Transition. I'm your host, Jim Schilling. Thank you for joining me on yet another journey of aviation career transformation. All right, so I am freshly back from AirVenture 2024. What an incredible show this year. I was out there for almost the entire week, and I was able to connect with an awful lot of listeners from both this podcast and the Flying Midwest podcast. So if you were one of the folks I was able to connect with, thank you so much for taking the time to come and say hello. I appreciate getting to meet each and every one of you and be able to hear your feedback about the podcast. Truth be told, we were stupid busy out there. We accomplished, I believe, 11 different interviews for episodes of Flying Midwest and made countless more connections with, again, listeners and potential guests for the future on that podcast. We also, each day of the show, did a daily recap and also kind of preview what we'll be up to the next day. If you want to hear our daily take on the AirVenture show, or you just aren't ready to let AirVenture go yet, go ahead and check those out on Flying Midwest Podcast. The series is called Touch and Go, and then we named each of the days like Information Alpha, Information Bravo, by the subsequent days of the show. Long story short, ton of work, but a ton of fun. And I'm already looking forward to going back next year. Speaking of another person who does a ton of work at AirVenture, let's talk about our guest for this episode. I know he too was incredibly busy grabbing a lot of content while he was at AirVenture this year, with the assistance of his talented co-host and crew. We are joined by the one and only Dan Millican. You will likely recognize his name from the YouTube channel and podcast of the same name, Taking Off. They have just a ton of videos on the channel and recently hit 100,000 subscribers. We featured Christy in the past and were able to tell her story of how she made it into the airlines from the allergy sciences field. Now I'm excited to talk with Dan. His story is a little bit different. He's not working in an airlines or any type of like corporate aviation job, but he is very active in aviation content creation, and that stems from a career working within film and production. So he'll tell us about his journey through that and how he was able to merge aviation into his professional career and ultimately begin the ongoing experiment we call Taking Off. So without further ado, let's jump into our interview with Mr. Dan Millican. All right, well, I'm happy to welcome Dan Millican to the Fly the Transition podcast. Dan, I am super excited to have you be a part of the podcast. So thank you for joining me.
You bet. It's good to be here with you, Jim.
Yeah, so you are... You've got quite an interesting story, in my opinion, of, you've worked in the film industry for years and you kind of jumped into this aviation space a little bit later and have really exploded on the, internet stage of aviation media, whether it be your YouTube channel or the podcast or Aerofirst. I would love to just pick your brain for a bit and just hear how you went down that trail into aviation a little bit more.
You bet.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm nerding out just a little bit because I've watched your stuff for a while and I love what you guys do on Taking Off. So I'm going to try to not let that become jitters as I interview here. So,
Well, you've already talked to Christy.
I have. I don't know why. You're a little bit more intimidating to me.
That's what everybody tells me.
Yeah. So to get started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, I was born. No, I'm just kidding. My aviation interest, like just about everybody else as a kid, all my books were airplanes, and reading about, these World War I airplanes and these World War II airplanes. And then I remember in late elementary, the big show on TV was Baba Black Sheep. And that was something that was just, oh my gosh. I mean, I remember we'd get popsicles at lunch at elementary school, and I would save my popsicle stick, and I started saving all my friends' popsicle sticks. Got a steak knife from my mom, and I would cut the rounded edge off of each popsicle stick on both sides and ended up with a whole bunch of planks. And from that, I built a Corsair and used model paint to paint it blue and everything. I wish I had it today, but I don't know what happened to it. But I built this Corsair, and getting the wings, the gull wings to stay in shape and everything else was tricky. But it took a long time and a lot of popsicles, but I built the Corsair. And, it's always been my favorite plane, probably always will be. But
was aviation something you explored then as you started to move towards adulthood?
One of the things I looked at in college was getting my private pilot's license. And I talked to a guy at my church who was an instructor, and he kind of said, okay, what you need to do is you need to do your ground school, and it's going to cost this much. And I had zero money. I was paying my way through college 100%. I was working 2 jobs and school full time, and I was averaging 3 to 4 hours sleep a night. I mean, that's what I was doing through college. So at that point, it's the classic, when you have the time, you don't have the money. And when you have the money, you don't have the time.
Sure.
Well, I had neither time nor money. And so I put away the dream of becoming a pilot.
You talked about how you had this interest in going after your private pilot when you were in college, right? At that time, were you looking at that more out of just a passion for aviation, or did you think about making that a career at that point?
Oh, it was totally a passion. Wasn't going to make it a career at all.
So what direction did you go? I mean, I know where you are now, obviously, but did you go into film right away through college?
Oh, yeah, that's what I went for. So what happened is that I was a junior in high school, and my best friend was a freshman in college, and he was a, quote, communications major, whatever that was. And one of his first projects, now this is really going to date me, one of his first projects was to create a multimedia deal. So this is where you go and you take slides, pictures, you put them all on 2 projectors. It has a way to dissolve between the 2 projectors. You build a 4-track reel-to-reel with unheard tones that mark when the projector would dissolve to the other projector, and you create a 4-minute presentation using these slides. And it's so archaic. It's embarrassing to talk about it. But I was a junior in high school, and he needed help, and he had his deadlines, as all film and TV and video do. And I ended up doing my first all-nighter helping him, and just absolutely said, this is what I want to do. So as a junior in high school, I decided this is what I'm going to do.
Was there something specific about that really caught your attention?
Probably the fact that I could be creative and get a payoff from being, it's really probably driving the creative side more than anything else. I could create, and there it was.
Yeah. I suppose there's that satisfaction too of just seeing that final product of taking these raw things and putting them together into something you're proud of.
Big time.
So you go to college for this. What does your career path look like after that?
What's funny is that back then, when I graduated with a bachelor's in radio television production with a double minor in drama and English, because I did a lot of writing, I'd been working 2 different jobs through college. One was a very part-time at the local cable company doing local origination programming, so working in their studio. But the max you could get was 15 hours a week. That's all you could do. But so my full-time job was as a restaurant manager in college. And I knew I wasn't going to do that. I wanted to get into video. The crazy thing is that for every job that was posted, there would be 200, 300, 400 applicants. So I remember calling, and one guy told me, said, you need to find a different career. You're not going to make it. And then, nobody's making it. Well, of course, you take that as a challenge.
Yeah. Right.
And I found ways to be creative. And actually, I got my first job because my wife's family owned a print business. And I created a leave behind for interviews of a notepad that had like a classified ad that I created at the top that was like, video producer seeks position, and I left that behind. And the guy that for a job that had 200 applicants was so impressed by that, I ended up getting the job there. And so I got my career started there doing some TV, and we were off to the races.
So the work that you're doing in television/film, was it production work? Were you doing camera work? Was it a little bit of everything at that point?
Well, back then, for that first job, it was the position was called a field producer /editor. So it was everything. And then, so I did camera work, I did editing, I did it all. And later, then as I moved up and moved on to other bigger companies or whatever, I ended up kind of traversing. There's two kind of paths back then. You could either head towards television and film, or you could head towards corporate video. And I ended up in corporate video, and getting a job with a production department of a big company, and did a lot of video and stuff there. And at some point, you start as the camera and everything else, and then you move into producing, and you're hiring the camera, you're hiring the editors and everything else. But through different phases of my career, I might be very hands-on on all phases of production, but a lot of times I'm hiring those people.
I think a lot of people have an idea of what obviously the TV and film industry looks like, but you're talking about the corporate side of media as well that people may not be as familiar with. So could you give us a little bit of a taste of what corporate media looks like?
Yeah, so that's going to be the training videos for corporations. It's going to be marketing videos. It's going to be commercials. It's going to be internal communications where the CEO's, giving a message to the company, or it might be a video explaining the benefits of their new insurance plan. So it's just a lot of different things like that, some of which might come across as sounding pretty boring, and a lot of people in corporate would take that way. For me, I'd always wanted to be in the filmmaking. I mean, it was really driving me. And so back in the 90s, as we were doing that, I would talk my corporate clients into, hey, you got this training video. What if we did it like Forrest Gump? And so we'd have Forrest sitting on the park bench, and I wrote a script, that would hit all their training points, but it was told as from Forrest's point of view. And then knowing that I wanted to do film and not video, because we use the term interchangeably today, but back then there was a real big difference. You wouldn't say, I'm going to go film this. You'd say, I'm going to go shoot it, because to film it, you'd use actual film. Yeah. And back then, that was a big deal. So I wanted to shoot film. And so like in the Forrest Gump example, I actually talked the client into approving a budget for us to shoot 16 millimeter for that. And, and I did things like that. I would try to be as creative as possible.
I think in this day and age, you don't think as much, like you said, about film being actual film like it used to be. So like when I first got into photography, it was film. And now it's all this digital stuff everywhere.
Back then in the 80s and 90s, pretty much anybody that was doing corporate video at a big corporation really wanted to make movies. Okay. And I was no different. And I used like the Forrest Gump and using film to kind of train myself on how to do that. And eventually made the leap where I left my job, left my career, and went and raised money to make movies. And so for about 10 years, I did a little bit of corporate video to stay alive. But over a course of 10 years, I actually made 5 movies, what we call features.
Wow.
And raised millions to do it. And the first 3 of them were all shot in 35 millimeter film. And until finally high def kind of really came unto its own, and then you could do that. But I had actors like Adam Baldwin, Lou Diamond Phillips, Yancey Butler, Mimi Rogers, Sean Patrick Flannery, Joey Lauren Adams were all in the movies. And honestly, though, I look back at that, there were a lot of mistakes made by myself, and otherwise I'd probably still be there, right? But at best, I'd call them B movies. I wish I'd made a really good movie. It's probably one of the big regrets in my life, but never really did that. And kind of after chasing that for quite some time, longer than most, I kind of got back into corporate video, ended up going back to just being a cameraman for a little bit of time just to earn money and work my way kind of back into it, and had a renewed love for corporate video. And then a lot of TV reality shows came into my lap, and I was able to chase those. And I really enjoy that because probably one of my strengths is what we call in the industry unscripted, which is not unscripted, by the way, but it's a term.
Don't say.
Reality shows are termed unscripted, but they're scripted. They're usually scripted on the fly, and that's where that's my strength. Okay. And so I could shoot, which then, parlayed into all the way into not only my channel, the Taking Off channel, but into the new aviation network called Arrowverse, because we're doing several unscripteds for that.
As you progressed through that, what would you say were some of the highs and the lows?
Well, the highs is that moment that you're sitting there watching your movie or your video for the corporate client, and you're really proud of it. You see your creativity come to life. That's the high, no doubt. Lows of it, the up and down of financial, especially during the movie time, and very low. And that at some point you get shaken and realize that you're doing a lot of stuff for ego at the cost of your family. And, that was a big, hard lesson that took some time to learn.
You get back into corporate. Where does S Films come into play here? Is that part of your corporate experience, or?
I was working for a video production company in the 90s that was part of a bigger insurance conglomeration. And that's where I was really cutting my teeth, and I knew I wanted to make movies. So in 1999, I decided to make the leap over to feature films, and I needed a production company. So one of my wife's favorite words is serendipitous, which is defined as a pleasant discovery. And so, this restaurant, what a serendipitous find. So I decided, well, that would be the name of the company. So I incorporated the name Serendipitous Films, and I just abbreviated S Films for short.
Okay.
And I did my movies through that. And then, of course, I by then had left the corporate world behind, and I would have old clients or whoever come up and say, hey, I need a video. And I would do some of that just to help make ends meet. And I did it all under S Films. So
it's kind of over, I assume probably necessity over time, kind of evolved from this film space back into corporate then.
Yes, exactly. And TV. I mean, I do a significant amount of TV. I haven't done a film in some time, but not that I'm opposed to it. It's just I can't do it for ego.
Before we continue with this episode, a quick word from those who make the Fly the Transition podcast possible. Hey there, aviation friends. I want to tell you about my friends over at Pilot Quarters. This Midwest family-owned business is ready to make your next favorite flying shirt. They offer a wide variety of chart-inspired camp shirts, polos, sundresses, and tees. You can shop by your state, your region, or even reach out to the guys for special requests. They're great shirts, they're great conversation pieces, and I know that I personally would be sporting mine at AirVenture in just a few weeks. So check the guys out over at pilotquarters.com today and soar in style. Are you a fan of the podcast that wants to show off your support at your next aviation event? Well, check out our awesome merch. We have t-shirts, hats, and more featuring our vibrant full-color logo, or if you prefer something a bit more subtle, go with the black stamp design. All of our shirts come in a variety of colors, so you can find the perfect fit for your style. Head on over to flymidwest.com/merch today to grab yours. We are entering the peak of summer flying season, and that means it's time to upgrade your eyewear with Flying Eyes. These aviation-inspired sunglasses feature a sleek, durable, and impact-resistant design. Their gradient lenses are perfect for pilots, providing maximum ease in reading your instrument panel. Say goodbye to those headache-inducing gas station sunglasses that fit poorly with your headset. Flying Eyes is designed by pilots for pilots to ensure superior comfort, even on the longest flights. Head on down to the affiliate link down in our show notes and enter code FlyingMidwest10 for 10% off your next purchase at Flying Eyes.
You're listening to Fly the Transition. If you've ever thought about changing careers and getting into the aviation industry, welcome to your new home. Now, back to your host, Jim Schilling.
Let's explore now the aviation space. We've talked a bit about how you got into film and television. Where do you get back into the world of aviation?
What happened 10 to 12 years ago is that drones became a real tool that we could use in my industry.
Oh, sure.
And it was rewriting some of the things that we could do visually. In the past, and I'd hired helicopters to get aerials of this or that, but then it became, now you can get the 20-foot view really easily. So the drone was able to give us really quickly a unique view that was hard to get otherwise. So, the jib could do the 20, 30, 40-foot view, but now we get an 80-foot view, and we really couldn't get that easily through helicopters. Okay. So game changer, the drone started. I went out and bought a custom-built octocopter. So this thing was huge. Sure. It had 16-inch wooden props and 8 of them. Could carry 18 pounds. So like a cinema camera. The best you get was a 2-axis gimbal. So it wasn't super smooth or fluid or anything. Controllers were just crazy as far as they would fly off on a wild hair or this or that, and your drone would just take off. Things like that were happening quite a bit.
In my line of work, we also were like kind of exploring drones in the early part of public safety drones, and we had the same problem where these things all of a sudden would just shoot straight up in the air. And clearly that's a problem.
Well, and my big octocopter had a problem with shooting straight down into the ground.
That's bad too.
From 100 feet. So yeah, there were issues, and it was a bit frustrating because I spent a lot of money from a business standpoint to get this octocopter, and I charted like what revenue I made from it, and just broke about even by the time it was totally destroyed and I couldn't rebuild it anymore. But and then it was shortly after that the Phantom 1, actually during the last part of me operating that big octocopter, DJI came out with the Phantom 1, and all of a sudden now the drones were a lot smaller. The crazy thing was I started reading, and the FAA was chasing some of the more kind of out there drone operators that were doing what I was doing for commercial purposes, insisting that these drone operators that are doing it for commercial purposes have a commercial pilot's license. Okay. And that wasn't very enforceable, for one thing. It became the Wild West out there. And I believe it was the courts that kind of told the FAA, who said they were working on a drone license, but they were still years away from it, that they need to do something. So the FAA came out with a stopgap until they could get a drone license. And what it was is the FAA said, if you get any level of pilot's license and apply for the exemption from the commercial pilot's rule, we'll grant you that waiver. And they called it the 333 waiver. Okay. And you can now operate a drone commercially. Well, I'd always wanted to learn to fly, so here was my absolute excuse with my family that doesn't like aviation. Now, it's for work. I went and got my private pilot's license, and then I applied for the 333 and got it. One of the few to actually go through that process, and was legal to fly commercially for drones. And then about 3 years later, they came out with the 107. But I knew I would fall in love with aviation. I knew it. But I also knew that if I were going to do aviation, it would have to be business related, because that's the only way I could do aviation. So nobody else is going to go fly for fun. They're not going to go on a weekend. Right now I'm over 1,500 hours, and my wife has flown exactly 0 hours with me. Wow. So that's what I knew I was looking at. Now, on my business side, running the TV, film, video company, I would say more than half of my work comes from outside of my area that the office is. So we're traveling all the time. Okay. And so then I looked at, well, maybe I can rent a plane, take the crew to these shoots instead of flying commercial. I realized that if I'm going to do that, I better have an instrument. So as soon as I was done with my private, I got my instrument and then started looking, and I couldn't afford an airplane. So I got a partner, and then I looked at my mission. My mission was to take up to 4 people, four of us and a crew, and gear, camera gear and everything else, and take them across the country. And to do that, the only airplane that could do that was the Cessna 210, the Centurion. The Bonanza did not have the payload. The Meridian even didn't have the Malibu, didn't have the payload. I mean, because those were
Malibu, huh?
Yeah, they were at like 1,300 useful. And I looked at my numbers, and I needed 14 to be able to pull this off. The Centurion was the perfect call for me. So we found a Centurion, and my partner was perfect in that he flew for American. So he only flew for fun, i.e. weekends. Mm-hmm. I only flew for business, i.e. weekdays, and it was a good match.
That's a good combination.
Yeah. So then, it just started flying. We bought a 210 Lola and flew Lola to Connecticut several times with crew, Pennsylvania. I flew to Montana quite a bit for some shoots, and across the Rockies to the Salt Lake City area. So I flew that plane and have been flying the plane quite a bit, but it's almost all business related. I don't just go into Lola and just for fun. I'm not burning holes in the sky, which, to me, there's really 2 types of pilots out there. The big group of pilots are those who just love to burn holes in the sky, just love the joy of flying. The second, smaller group of pilots are those who just love a really cool way to transport from point A to point B. Sure. And I actually fall in the second group. So I'm not that tempted to just, let's just go fly and burn holes in the sky. I need to be mission-driven, purpose-driven on what I'm going to be doing with my flying.
Okay, interesting. So Lola's basically just a mode of transportation, but do you consider getting other ratings beyond just the instrument rating?
I looked down in my logbook one day and saw that I had all the requirements met now for a commercial pilot's license and went, well, what the heck? Let's just get it.
Yeah, right.
So did the check ride, got my commercial pilot's license. And another year later, I looked down at the book and go, you know what? I've checked all the boxes for CFI. So that was by the way, I'll let you know, that was one tough check ride.
I've heard.
Yeah.
I am not looking forward to it.
My oral of my CFI initial was 5.5 hours. Yeah, I walked out of that going, I don't know anything. A year or two later, went ahead and got my double I and have just started rating collecting. So, I think that I will go after my ATP.
You've got the 1,500.
Yeah, I got the 1,500. I've got my multi, although I don't have any PIC time yet other than the check ride. I do want to get some PIC time, get more than 15 hours, and then go after my MEI just for the fun of it. So I've got my CFI, I got my CFII. I don't teach for money.
That's what I was just going to ask you. If you do much instructing, or are you doing like flight reviews for friends?
I do a lot of instruction, but I don't do it really for money. I do it. So like my crew, I've been working with these guys for 20 years. They knew me long before I was ever in the cockpit. And I thought, well, why not when we're going to Montana, let me give you some time and go ahead and give them lessons. Then I thought there's a lot of places out there that'll do intensive, quick licenses, or certificates.
Yeah.
And I saw a few that could do it in 2 weeks for the private. The vast majority of the fast ones were 3 weeks. And I thought, okay, I can probably afford 1 week to take off from my business. What if we bookend it with the weekend? So we get 9 days, and let me see how far I can take 3 people. And they were all my crew that work with me in video. And I partnered with Fort Worth Flight School out of Fort Worth Spinks. Great people there, Josh Menz and his team. I took these guys through and got them to, see if they could solo and that kind of stuff. Well, one of my crew persons, one of the ones that soloed, I wanted these guys to continue on their own and get their license, but none of them have. But what has happened is I've ended up flying a whole bunch with the guy that soloed. He's now sitting at 60 hours. He's got 25 hours of cross country. He's got 15 hours of really actual instrument.
Wow.
He's met the 3-hour requirement.
He sure has.
Yeah, and he's really good. The problem is in a 210, you just cannot use that for, beating up the pattern. The gear is not good for that. The engine's not what it's made for. It's a cross-country machine. You don't want to use that for training. I really wish that they would go ahead and sign up and get their private, but, lead a horse to water.
Yep, exactly. In addition to collecting all these different ratings, you also were able to join your professional career with your film, video, and production experience and combine that with your aviation passion. So most of our listeners probably know you already from your YouTube presence on Taking Off. So tell us a bit about how you got into creating the channel Taking Off.
The birth of Taking Off is just like what I talked about my aviation journey, is that if I'm going to do aviation, it's going to be because it's business. I got back into embracing the corporate video bread and butter and actually enjoyed it and got satisfaction from that. And then, the drones, we talked about that. And then that moves from one thing to another. And I'm doing S films and we're doing a lot of corporate work, some commercial, a little bit of TV. And then I have a corporate client who reached out to me shortly after I'd bought the plane. And by the way, an aside, it's really funny. Here I am shooting. I got a ton of cameras. I got a bag full of GoPros, right? All this kind of stuff. And I'm going through my flight training so I could do, drone work commercially, legally. It never occurred to me to videotape my flying, the lessons or anything else. So never hit my mind for that.
I suppose that might be a good thing though, because then you're focused on the
it was. I was focused entirely on learning the flight, with one exception. Toward the end, right before my check ride, I thought I'd get cute, and so you have to give a briefing to your passengers, right?
Yeah, sure do.
And so I used my phone camera, my iPhone, and I made a quick video briefing and edited it together. And so then when I was on my check ride and the examiner gets in the plane, sits there, I pulled out my phone and said, okay, pay attention to this briefing, just like you might get at American Airlines.
Yeah, that's great.
And that was the only time I did that. And I never really watched YouTube videos, other than the only time I watched YouTube was when I was trying to learn how to fix something. Right. I didn't just for fun jump on YouTube and watch videos. I didn't know anything about aviation videos. I never heard of Aviation 101, Josh Flowers. I'd never heard of Mike Patey or any of those guys. I had no knowledge. So then what happened, I have a corporate client approach me and say, Dan, we want to know how to build our YouTube channel. And I had book knowledge on best practices for building a YouTube channel, but I really didn't know. So I spent 6 months working really hard on my own S Films YouTube channel. And I did all the best practices, posting once a week, doing this, doing that. And after 6 months of really hard work, I had grown my S Films YouTube channel by 50 subscribers.
That sounds about right.
So I learned a big lesson, and I sat back and I went, okay, what am I doing wrong? What's going on? And then I realized, well, first of all, S Films is B2B. For those who don't know, that's business to business. I'm a B2B company. So I'm not making something for consumers, or B2C. If you're B2B, you got to change your expectations, because 50 people, that a significant number of them might buy or order a $50,000 video, that's awesome. 1 million people who will never contract a video is a waste. So a B2B is a totally different environment than a B2C on the YouTube expectations. But what about a B2C YouTube channel. What could I do? As I'm like flying my 210 to here and there with a bag full of GoPros on the thing. Finally, it hit me. Oh, I know. I could experiment by building a niche market YouTube channel, but it's B2C, and I could do that. So then I started looking what's out there, and I found the Steve-O's and I found the Flight Chops and stuff like that. And just, okay, so they're putting GoPros on in cockpits as they're flying. Well, I can certainly do that and edit them. Now, it's going to be a lot of work to try to do once a week. And the other thing is, this was all an experiment to see how to build a YouTube channel so I could go back to my clients to talk to them about it.
So this was not anything like, I'm going to make a YouTube channel for me and have this great aviation media empire.
Nope. It was like, what can I kind of go to school on? I know, aviation. Now, that was January 2018, by the way. It was pretty much too late to come in and do flying videos and expect to see massive growth.
Yeah.
There was a guy that I featured his Bonanza, his VTOL, while my plane was down. I had to try to keep getting content, and this is about 4 months into the channel, 4 or 5 months. And he suggested I do set up some chairs in a hangar and do like a talk show. Well, me owning a production company and being in a place that has 4 studios here on site, you can't control the lighting, the sound, all that kind of stuff. And it would drive me really crazy to do bad videos. So that's when I decided I would do in the hangar and actually do it in the studio. So and that's where In the Hangar was born. Now, I have a saying that you're looking for small squeeze, big juice. So little squeeze, big juice. And, flying videos at that point were big squeeze, little juice, which is the opposite of what you want. So it was taking a lot of effort, i.e. squeeze, to get any kind of performance from them. So I kind of knew some tricks in production, and one of which is, shoot 14, 15 episodes in one day.
Yeah.
Shoot them in such a way that you can actually just kind of, in our industry, we call it shooting live to tape. Okay. So live to tape is a phrase meaning you're shooting it as if live, but it's going to tape. And so I shot live to tape. In other words, we're switching the cameras and everything else. I don't have to go back through and do a multi-camera edit and pick.
Oh, okay.
So I'm like if we were doing this right now, I would have somebody pushing a button as I'm talking to have my camera up. And then when you talk, they'd push the button to have your camera up. And there's very little editing, i.e. squeeze, left to do.
Sure.
And so that's how In the Hangar was born. We would do a batch of shows at one time. And the other thing, in keeping with this is all an experiment, will it make any difference if I have a female host versus a male host? And again, at this time, the channel's 4 or 5 months old.
Yeah.
And I might have 400 or 500 subscribers total. I mean, it's not huge by any means. But again, experimenting with different things, weekly releases and trying different things. So we've got a very active North Texas Facebook group for aviation.
Okay.
And in there, I'd seen, pictures and posts by a girl that was learning to fly, and she was very extrovert. And I thought, as a film director, I thought, she's got some natural talent in front of the camera that I can work with. I'll see if she would be interested. Of course, that's always a weird call. Hey, pretty blonde girl, you want to come? I can make you a star. You want to come on the show?
I saw you on Facebook. You want to come be on my camera?
Yeah, and especially a channel that's got all of 500 subscribers.
Right.
So, but I met Christy. She agreed to do it. And although she did have questions at the beginning, but then when, it's funny, everybody that had questions, and then they walk into the studio and they see how legit it is. I mean, it's a real studio, makeup rooms, green rooms, a soundproof studio with cameras everywhere, so she came on, and that first day, we only did 1 day of taping. We did 14 shows, and the idea was that I would do some and she would do some. And then I'd kind of just be able to see as an experiment, was there any difference between a female-driven host versus a male-driven host? Sure. That was the experiment, one of many I was doing. And the very last one we just did them together. And by the way, the answer, no, they all performed about the same, by the way. It's really more content driven, which surprised me. I thought maybe Pretty Girl would get more views. It's about the content. It's about the subject more than anything else, and you got to have that. Now, one thing about the beginning of the channel, this was an experiment. So I did not feel that I could take resources from S Films, and I couldn't pay or hire S Films to do anything on this. So the beginning of the channel was all me 100% of the time or volunteers.
Gotcha.
And because it wasn't producing revenue, I would stay up late at night editing all these videos in the midst of everything else I was doing. I would do all the shooting myself. I would do everything myself. When it came time to end the hangar, I reached out for volunteers, and you get what you pay for. I mean, bless their hearts. I remember the very first episode that we taped, which wasn't the first episode that I released. I would release them in different order. The first episode we taped, we had 3 cameras, a wide, a camera on me, and a camera on the guest. Well, the volunteer that was manning the camera that focused on the guest did what we call a double tap or a double clutch. And what that is when you're running camera, if you hit the button, but you kind of hit it twice, it starts and then stops, but you don't realize it.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, we didn't have the guest camera. So that entire episode was either the 2-shot when the guest was talking or close up on me. So and it was a real hard part for me because I'm working in a production company. I own a production company where production value is everything.
Yeah.
And I'm going out to really big clients saying, trust your training video to us. And then if they were to go look at my channel and see kind of what I would consider to be amateur, wide shot, where's the close up, with stuff that people probably really don't care about. And that was one of the big lessons I learned too, is that production value, unfortunately, doesn't really matter anymore. Unfortunately for me, because I work in production value. So,
right.
It just wasn't as important.
So this all starts as this experiment.
It still is to this day, by the way.
Is it really?
Yeah. Everything I do is an experiment. Okay. So like I'll give you a case in point. I purposely added in a news report video that I did about 9 months ago, I went ahead and threw in a little political sentence towards my right-wing leaning viewpoints that I have. And I did it very calculated. I wanted to see what would happen. Boy, did I. That particular comment really stoked some fires that I wasn't expecting. So
with one sentence.
With one little aside. It's all, I am still experimenting and seeing what grows the channel.
When you first started this experiment, did you really have any intentions of carrying it forward at all? Or did it just kind of take off, so to speak? And you just kept going with it? If
you're going to test, if you're going to experiment, it has to be for the long term. You cannot do a 1-month experiment and go, okay, that's what it is. You have to try something for 9 months, a year to see if it works. And a lot of people lose heart because, they'll go, oh, I'm going to make a YouTube channel. And they work really hard for, 6 weeks, 2 months, not seeing results and get discouraged and bow out. But I knew going in, this kind of thing's going to take years to build. And so I had the patience coming in, the expectations coming in so that I wouldn't lose too much heart as I went forward. One of the things I had read was that, the first big KPI, key performance indicator, is 1,000 subscribers. Once you hit 1,000 subscribers, some things open up. In addition to having to reach a certain threshold of views, now you can monetize, right?
Okay.
So that's a big thing. So the 1,000 KPI was a big one. And I had read that the amount of time it takes you to go from 0 to 1,000 will probably be equal to the time it takes you to go from 1,000 to 10,000. And that ended up proving 100% accurate.
No kidding.
So it took 9 months for taking off to go from 0 to 1,000, and it took 9 months for taking off to go from 1,000 to 10,000.
That's crazy.
I'd also then heard that, the amount of time to go from 10,000 to 100,000 would be really short. No, that wasn't true. It took us a lot longer because really what I was doing was building the channel through solid singles and doubles. Okay. I wasn't building it through home runs, and a lot of channels are built through home runs. So they get that million view video right off the bat. That does help drive, especially in the early days of YouTube's algorithm, that would help drive a lot of things, but that's not the way it is today. It used to be you do a home run, you release a video, and YouTube's going to be pumping that to the people that watched your million view video. It's not what it does not happen today. So you can do a million view video, follow it up with another video that only gets 2,000 views. So it's just interesting about the algorithm and how YouTube keeps changing it and the things you've got to learn. You're going to have to get outside the niche market and go to a more general audience if you want to have home runs. In a niche market, you need to be content with singles and doubles.
That's an interesting point. And I think in watching your content, it's interesting that you don't just take one approach. It's not like it's just in the hangar. It's just crash investigation videos. It's more than that within how you guys put things together, right?
So what I determined early on in that first year is that the channel was a lifestyle channel. It's not pilot training, but instead I realized, and again, this is all very calculated and experimenting, is that I wanted to make it lifestyle. So I encouraged Christy to be real in front of the camera. Hey, if you're having a bad day, let's see that. If I'm having a bad day, let's see that, or whatever. Because I think that people will get invested in the people they see on the videos.
Sure.
And so I wanted to lean into it. There was a very big aviation YouTuber that I talked to back at this time when I was sub 1,000. This YouTuber was very big about keeping their personal life totally off the record. Could not ask them questions about the personal life. They did not want to have any of that in there. And I can respect that. For me, I knew early on, especially from my experience in TV, I'm a reality show director, engagement is driven by story. Story is driven by conflict. So conflict doesn't have to be two people fighting. It can be internal conflict. It can be external conflict. It can be nature versus man. It can be all these different things. But engagement and people staying glued to the video is going to be driven by conflict unless it's educational. Like In the Hangar is mostly educational. But if you look at our biggest in the hangars, it's Dan Bass talking about his story of passing out with carbon monoxide and waking up, the plane landed itself. Well, I mean, that's incredible conflict, man versus nature, man versus machine. Yeah. I wanted to lean into the conflict side of things, which is not what very many people are willing to do.
What are some of the highs and lows you've had through this journey through taking off?
Well, the highs are when somebody walks up to you and says, I wasn't going to get my pilot's license, but I went ahead and went through it because you and Christy and Bailey, you guys encouraged me so much and through your videos. That's a high, undoubtedly. So we love those. Lows, you'd like to say that you're above like some of the personal attacks that may come through comments, but there's a few that might sting, and usually those are because they have some modicum of truth to them. and I'll tell you that my flying skills are much improved because I put it out there and people would comment. My radio work is much more clear and concise, all because of comments that people made. But the lows can be the amount of work it takes, because again, even to this point, now that the channel's making some revenue so I could afford to hire people, there's not an editor I can hire. It's a big ask to find an editor who is also a pilot, an editor that knows the difference between showing a low wing when we're talking about a Cessna. I'm editing probably 90% of what you see on the Taking Off channel. It's a lot of late nights editing, even to today.
You mentioned that you're doing like 90% of all this editing, and I don't know how many people realize this still, but this isn't just your full-time gig. I mean, no, you still have work with S-Films that you do, right?
Yeah, and what's funny is with Arrowverse kicking up, I found the same problem, but now with a big corporate client. So, S-Films does TV, and we do reality shows. And like, we traveled all over the world 2 years ago shooting a particular kind of docuseries, and I could shoot that and hand it off to my editor and then come back, give corrections, notes, whatever. And that was all well and good, and I never had to edit. Now with Arrowverse, we're doing a show where it is 100% aviation, and we're into the same boat I have with taking off. They just don't know. I mean, we do a show that's kind of centers on airplanes and coffee.
Yeah.
Well, they look at all the footage, and there's a mountain of footage, and they have no idea where to start. So I have to jump back in. Yeah. And I mean, by the time I've explained everything to them, I could have gotten a first draft done. So I went right back into it. So now I have a corporate client, and I'm having to do all the editing, and I've got 2 other editors on staff who really can't do anything for it. So that's been hard.
So you've mentioned Arrowverse. How did that start to come to fruition?
What's funny is that, in a way, taking off is kind of what I wanted to do. That's what Arrowverse, but Arrowverse is kind of so much better and a next level of what I would have been able to do. But basically, an individual wanted to have one place, a network, where he could go and watch nothing but aviation. And he looked around, there wasn't anything. He ran into a network guy who freelances contracts, and it's the same network guy who hired me to do a lot of TV. He had left that company that I did the docuseries for, and he was just kind of semi-retired, and he ran into the guy, and they said, well, what you need to do is start with a video-on-demand app, and we can populate that with, library titles. We're going to go and license all these movies and documentaries and TV series that are aviation-driven, and we'll make original content as well that you can't find anywhere else. And so that guy from the network goes, oh, I know the perfect person. He has a video production company, and he's a pilot. And what's funny is that I knew that individual anyway, but I didn't know he was wanting to start a network. And so it was just a perfect match of the network guy, the guy that wanted to create something like this, and then me. So I'm really hoping Arrowverse takes off because it would just be so great. So as a plug, go to arrowverse.com. Use our discount code taking off. You get 15% off your subscription.
Nice.
The shows that we're creating for Arrowverse are being very well received. So there's 300 titles on Arrowverse right now. Number 1 watched show on Arrowverse is the original series that we're doing called Throttle Jockey with Chelsea Smith from Aviation 101.
Okay, sure.
Number 1 watched show is our original stuff that we're doing. And I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of the quality, the production value, how compelling it is, and everything else. I'm very proud of it.
So what is her show about again?
So Throttle Jockey is about kind of a day in the life of a working pilot. Because so often when we hear the term working pilot, you only think of 121. You think shoulder boards and, a tie and a cap. 100%. And there are so many other working pilots out there and so many other pilot jobs that and in a lot of ways that's how we approach it, is like micro dirty jobs. We're going to do it with pilot jobs, with Chelsea being the micro, and that was kind of our model. That's
really cool. Well, now I'm going to have to use your code and go watch it.
Yeah, go subscribe, use my code, and watch it. AEROVERSE.com, Arrowverse.
Awesome. I'm going to for sure check that out. Your little experiment here just recently hit 100,000 subscribers. Experiment or not, that has to be a big milestone for you, right?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, hitting the 100,000, that's after 1,000 to me. I mean, 10,000 is a KPI, but really the 100,000 is the first big KPI, because now, I mean, you get the plaque for one thing from YouTube, but it just. And by the way, as far as the experiment of can I create a channel that generates revenue, because that's really kind of what the whole thing was, is how to do that. The subscriber count has nothing to do with revenue. Let me make that clear. You can have 1 million subscribers and make $0 from the channel. So it's all really the views count and how long people stay viewing, which leads to your revenue per 1,000 views. But It's just a quick metric to be able to tell people, yeah, we got 100,000 followers. That says something to people, even though it's not the important metric, but it is.
At some point, you guys started venturing into podcasting as well. So how did that journey begin?
Well, a couple of years ago, I went, man, I'm starting to develop, we've got 200-300 episodes of In the Hangar. I could absolutely, with little squeeze, turn those into podcasts. So I thought about it. And then about a year and a half ago, as I started to actually look into the nuts and bolts of what it would take to make that happen, I had a corporate client who had a big conference online during COVID.
Okay.
And one of the aspects is that they wanted to have a podcast in between their content. And so I budgeted in and bought the microphone that I'm talking to now, bought 4 of those, the Rode Podcaster board and all that stuff. And I had that and we used it. And then 1 year later, we used it again. And it was about that time I was like, man, for the rest of the year, this stuff just sits in the production room with all our gear. I really should do something. I've got the gear, so I opened it up, dusted it off, set it up, and went and started playing with the Rode Podcaster. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I thought, okay, I need to start doing this. And about the same time, YouTube announced that they had created under their playlist a podcast that's really different from their normal channel. And there would be, I don't know exactly how, but it plays different in the algorithm they have. Okay. So, again, trying to do low squeeze, high juice, bring Christy in. Let's do an episode on the, American Airlines 191 or the Payne Stewart crash or, upcoming AirVenture, can I call in Josh Flowers or something like that? And so we started doing that. And then my plan is to supplement that with library titles from, the In the Hangars and other things that I may have. So that's how the podcast came about.
You guys having some success with that? Is it going well for you?
What's interesting, I wanted to, again, experiment. It's all experimenting.
Yeah.
How would the podcast do? I don't really have good analytics to be able to see what's happening outside of YouTube. So I don't know on Spotify or Apple or any of those how well it's doing. I can only see really what is happening on YouTube. And I thought that the podcast, because I'm not, video is a throwaway on the podcast. I set up a GoPro and just let it run for an hour, or I just let it run. I don't do any cuts. And by the way, it took a lot for me to swallow to do that kind of low production value. But I'm like, you know what? It's not about the video. We're just going to do this. And it's a podcast. It's audio, guys. Mm-hmm. So I did that, and lo and behold, I'm getting kind of the same kind of numbers I would with a multi-camera in the hangar. So it does make me think maybe I just, skip in the hangar and just do podcasts because it's a lot easier. But I think In the Hangar speaks to the base. And so even though In the Hangar doesn't do the kind of numbers like if I were to do accidents full time or lean into the news or things like that, I think it does feed our base, and there's a value there in feeding the base.
The very last question I have for you. If someone is eyeing, whether it be aviation content creation or some other type of creative space within aviation, what kind of advice would you give them?
The first thing you need to do is define your purpose or your mission, because everything needs to filter to that. If your mission, and you need to be honest with yourself too. A lot of people go, oh, I'm just doing it because I just have a passion to put that out there.
Right.
Okay, well, that may be true, but it's not the primary motivation for you. And so there's something that we call, there is no such thing as a pure motive. In other words, one motive. There's always a bunch of motives. There might be one that drives all the others. And through the years, the motive can change. Like I was talking to Brian Turner, we talk all the time about this stuff. And the driving motive for Brian was different 3 years ago than it is today on his channel.
Yeah.
So it can absolutely change. But my advice would be you need to define your purpose, determine what that primary motive is. Is it to make money? And is it to be, so that you walk into an FBO and people recognize you? Well, I mean, be honest. That's ego, but be honest. I mean, if that's what's driving it, then your creativity is going to follow a different strategy than if all you're doing is an outlet of your creativity and you don't care who watches. That's a different deal. And it's a different set of advice that I would give. So the first step is to define what it is you're trying to do.
I think that's good advice. So as we wrap up here, obviously there's a few places we can find you. You want to tell us about those? Obviously, taking off on YouTube.
Taking off on YouTube. And what's funny is I have had some brand confusion because people go, oh, it's Dan Millican from In the Hangar. Well,
right.
I get that a lot. And
I bet you do.
The problem was because as a TV guy, right, when you say channel, I'm going to think, okay, there's going to be a news program, there's going to be a sports program, there's going to be documentaries, there's going to be sitcoms, there's going to be different shows inside of a channel. So when I created the Taking Off channel, I thought about that. Well, I'll have flying shows, and then I'll have a talk show in the hangar. That'll be a show on the Taking Off deal. So because of that, I had brand confusion. And probably in hindsight, maybe I would have created a different channel for In the Hangar. I don't know. But because I look around and other channels, and I used air quotes for those just listening, the other channels tend to be just one show and not be multiple shows. So anyway, you can find me at Taking Off on YouTube. So youtube.com/takingoff. You can also find, I do have a website for S-Films, s-films.com. That's for my corporate and TV work. And I don't keep the webpage very updated. But those are the primary places. Instagram at Taking Off Dan. That's one thing too. I've only recently started to kind of go to school on Instagram, and I'm trying to build that. And things are a lot different today than they were 5-6 years ago on Instagram. So I am trying some different things on Instagram to see what it takes to build that. And on Facebook, of course, look for our Taking Off page. I think it's Taking Off YouTube on Facebook.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining me on this episode.
You bet.
I really appreciate you taking the time. A big thank you to Dan once again for joining me on the Fly the Transition podcast. It was really great getting to connect with him at AirVenture this year, say hello, and watch how professional he is and how he puts together the Taking Off content. I think that a lot of people probably take for granted all the work that goes into creating something like that. I know that on the podcasting side, yes, recording and editing audio is time-consuming, but when you add the component of video, even though he talks about, kind of the method in which they record, there's still a lot of work that he does in the background. So as a viewer of Taking Off, Dan, I greatly appreciate all the work that you, your crew, Christy, Bailey, all put into the channel. It is truly entertaining, and I appreciate what you do in this space. All right, so let's talk about our next episode. Next time around, I'm going to be joined by Tyler. He is a flight instructor in Western Michigan. At a young age, he wanted to get into aviation, but ultimately, after the movie SWAT came out in 2003, he went down the path of law enforcement. After a short time in the field, he would end up working for an agency that bordered an airport, and that relit his aviation passion. So check out our next episode and hear how Tyler went about making his dream become a reality. As always, if you like what I'm doing on the Fly the Transition podcast, please leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. It will sure help grow the show and push us out to a larger audience. If you'd like to connect or you want to be a guest on a future episode, you can reach out to me on any of my social medias, which will be in the show notes, or you can email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Once again, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition, and until next time, keep your eyes on the sky and your dreams soaring high.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.